A low winter sun hangs over Paris, and an elegant woman in a tailored charcoal coat pauses on the Pont de la Concorde. She leans on the balustrade, eyes fixed on the slow current of the Seine. A gust of wind lifts the veil from her wide, almond-shaped eyes that once graced every magazine cover from Tehran to New York. Passers-by sense the melancholy in her stance. A young tourist fumbles for his phone, convinced he recognizes her, but unable to place the face. She turns away before he snaps the picture, disappears into the traffic, and one more chance to identify the princess with the sad eyes slips into legend. That fleeting silhouette is Princess Soraya Esfandiary-Bakhtiary, a woman whose life promised every glitter of fairytale royalty, yet delivered an ache so profound it still echoes through palaces, penthouses, and pages of forgotten diaries. We will stand beside her in gilded halls, in dim hospital corridors, and on windswept European terraces, watching, listening, feeling. To understand Soraya's tragic arc, we must first feel the pulse of the era that shaped her. She was born on June 22, 1932, in Isfahan, deep in Iran's central plateau, a city where rose-colored domes, Safavid mosaics, and the languid Zayandarud River cast a spell of antiquity. Her father, Khalil Esfandiary-Bakhtiary, came from a proud Bakhtiari tribal line, but served the modernizing state as a diplomat. Her mother, Eva Karl, a statuesque German with a soft Rhineland accent, had met Khalil at a Berlin soirée in the 1920s. Their courtship bridged worlds, blending Persian desert warmth with the cool discipline of Weimar-era Europe. Little Soraya spent her earliest years darting between tiled courtyards and shaded orchards, chasing pomegranates, learning old tribal songs from Bakhtiari relatives, then suddenly absorbing German nursery rhymes from her mother's visiting sisters. From the outset, her identity was a delicate lattice of East and West, ancient and modern. The 1930s were restless for Iran. Reza Shah, founder of the Pahlavi dynasty, bulldozed tradition in his rush to build railroads, universities, and a standing army modeled on European powers. Young Soraya grew amid telegrams announcing new factories and rumors of secret police. When she was 9, World War II caught up with her mixed heritage household. Allied troops forced Reza Shah to abdicate in 1941, and his teenage son, Mohammad Reza, took the throne. Diplomats' families became targets for scrutiny. Khalil was posted to Berlin, then quickly shuffled to neutral Switzerland. For Soraya, that meant a tearful farewell to Isfahan's cyan domes and her first experience of alpine snow. She was enrolled at a convent school near Montreux, run by stern but kind French nuns. Each dawn, cowbells echoed across the lake while Soraya conjugated Latin verbs and perfected her French accent. She would later confide that Switzerland taught her discipline, but also planted the loneliness that would never quite leave her. By 16, she was fluent in Persian, German, French, and English, yet spoke none with complete ease. Summers brought respite in Bad Godesberg, where her father served as Iran's envoy to Bonn. There, at diplomatic garden parties, Soraya's dark hair and striking height drew glances. Gossip fluttered that she looked like a film star. She dismissed the compliments, but secretly nursed a teenage dream to join the cinema one day. Fate had other plans. In the autumn of 1950, during a London stopover, she accompanied her mother to the Iranian embassy for what she thought was a routine tea. Among the guests stood a slim man of 31 wearing a tailored Savile Row suit, his hair slicked into a gleaming wave. He introduced himself simply as Mohammad Reza. Only after a slight bow did Soraya realize she was shaking hands with the Shah of Iran, sovereign over 20 million souls, commander of the imperial armed forces, and arguably the most eligible bachelor of the Middle East. Their conversation began with pleasantries, England's drizzle, Swiss boarding school food, but soon veered into poetry and politics. The Shah quoted Hafez, Soraya countered with Goethe. He asked about her Bakhtiari lineage and listened intently when she described her tribe's horseback rituals. By the time the tea cooled, a nervous embassy aide whispered that His Majesty's car had waited 30 minutes at the curb. The Shah finally excused himself, but not before requesting a second meeting. That evening, Eva Karl sputtered in disbelief. "Soraya, you cannot possibly imagine what this means." Soraya simply stared at the rain-streaked window, recalling how the monarch's voice trembled ever so slightly when he mentioned nightingales singing in Isfahan. She went to bed convinced she had just met a sensitive intellectual hiding behind royal trappings. Courtship under an autocracy is seldom private. Within weeks, Tehran newspapers splashed grainy telephoto shots of Soraya stepping from limousines outside jewelry boutiques. Foreign correspondents labeled her the Persian Cinderella. Specialized clinics in Zurich were secretly consulted to ensure the potential queen's fertility, though neither Soraya nor the Shah admitted knowledge of these intrusive tests at the time. In October 1950, the Shah proposed. Soraya, barely 18, accepted with equal parts excitement and trepidation. An engagement ring arrived by diplomatic pouch, a square-cut diamond encircled by twin emeralds, symbolizing Iran's eternal oases. When press photographers captured the jewel on her finger, Parisians sighed, and New York matrons dredged up memories of Grace Kelly's pending union with Prince Rainier. The wedding, set for December 12, 1951, threatened to outshine any coronation Europe had staged since the war. Hundreds of tailors and jewelers jammed Tehran hotels. Dior designed Soraya's gown, 15 meters of silver lame threaded with seed pearls, topped by a 2-meter-long mink-lined silk veil. The dress weighed nearly 30 kilograms, so heavy that seamstresses stitched secret loops inside the bodice so palace handmaids could lift sections of fabric while Soraya walked. On the morning of the ceremony, a rare snowstorm blanketed Tehran. Old people whispered that snow on a royal wedding day meant angels were blessing the union. The Shah, clad in a white uniform with epaulets glistening in the floodlights, waited on a raised dais in the marble throne hall of Golistan Palace. As Soraya entered, the orchestra struck up an arrangement of Mendelssohn, and courtiers inhaled sharply at the sight of her emerald tiara shimmering against the fresh snow, visible through stained glass windows. Television sets from Cairo to Copenhagen crackled with the broadcast. For many Iranians, it was the first live event they ever watched. Yet beneath the pageantry simmered a volatile reality. Iran's oil riches attracted covetous eyes from London and Washington. 2 months after the wedding, nationalist Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh moved to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian oil company. The Shah found himself squeezed between an aging aristocracy, desperate to maintain British ties, and a rising tide of populist fervor demanding independence. Princess Soraya, still practicing how to address generals without blushing, suddenly hosted luncheons where cabinet ministers shouted across crystal vases. She wrote later in her unfinished memoir that she often stood by a window, fingering the lace of her gown, wondering whether kings and queens anywhere actually enjoyed their meals. From 1951 to 1953, Tehran lived on the edge of revolt. Soraya tried to project calm, inaugurating orphanages, presiding over women's literacy drives, sponsoring a children's puppet theater. Cameras loved her. Her tall, willowy frame and wistful smile softened the regime's image. In private, she watched her husband grow increasingly sleepless, pacing marble corridors at 3 a.m., chain-smoking gitans. when the CIA and MI6-backed coup toppled Mossadegh in August 1953, restoring the Shah's full powers. Soraya was in Ramsar, recovering from a severe bout of typhoid. She listened to shortwave bulletins describing tanks rumbling through Tehran streets and feared the monarchy would collapse before she could say goodbye to her mother. Instead, the coup succeeded, and jubilant courtiers credited divine intervention. Soraya, still feverish, whispered to her nurse, "Perhaps God has other plans, and they may not be merciful." The following years seemed, on the surface, a renaissance. Oil money flowed. Soraya oversaw renovations of Niavaran Palace, introducing Bauhaus-inspired glass walls and ordering Italian chandeliers. She became patron of Iranian fashion designers, encouraging blends of paisley brocade with Parisian silhouettes. Time magazine ran a cover story titled "New Look in Old Persia," featuring Soraya in a silk cocktail dress beside rugs from Qom. Older Iranians, steeped in tradition, winced at her Western tastes. Younger women emulated her cropped fringe and winged eyeliner. Diplomats observed that she walked a tightrope, too European for hardline clerics, too Persian for European snobs who treated Iran as an oil field with ancient ruins attached. Amid the glamour, a silent crisis brewed. By 1954, palace doctors whispered about delays. Court gossip crystallized around one question: could the queen bear a son? Monarchies survive on heirs, and with the Shah's health fragile, the wartime exile had left him with recurring fevers. Pressure mounted. Soraya endured a parade of specialists: Viennese endocrinologists, Swiss obstetricians, French nutritionists prescribing raw milk diets. She submitted to X-rays, exploratory procedures, hormonal injections that left her trembling. Eva Karl flew in to hold her daughter's hand while court ladies speculated over tea. The Shah reassured Soraya in private, "My love, we have time." But his ministers didn't. They murmured about polygamy, about finding a second wife for duty alone. Each rumor reached Soraya's ears like a poisoned needle. In 1955, she visited a Munich clinic famed for experimental fertility treatments. Reporters camped outside, snapping photographs of a pale, scarf-wrapped queen entering side doors at dawn. Inside, doctors delivered devastating news. Her uterus bore scarring from an infection likely contracted during childhood. The chances of pregnancy were near nil. She returned to Tehran numb, her Dior dresses suddenly feeling like costumes from a play in which she no longer had a role. Still, she attended state dinners, her smile polite but distant. Courtiers noted she spent more time in the palace gardens, feeding peacocks, sketching roses in a notebook no one was allowed to read. By early 1955, political reality cornered the royal couple. The Shah adored Soraya, but Iran's constitution, steeped in centuries of patriarchal precedent, demanded a male successor. Clerics threatened to question the Shah's legitimacy if he failed to secure the dynasty's future. Western ambassadors warned that any instability could invite Soviet meddling. In February, the Shah proposed legalizing a second marriage while keeping Soraya as his chief consort, echoing Qajar-era polygamy. Soraya, raised on European ideals of romantic exclusivity, recoiled. For 3 nights they argued behind closed doors, voices echoing down mosaic-lined corridors. On March 14, 1950, the royal court announced the irrevocable divorce. The statement praised Soraya's nobility, grace, and dedication, but Tehran radio anchors could hardly disguise the grief in their tone. The next morning, Soraya packed in silence while servants wept openly. The Shah slipped into her suite, handed her a sealed envelope, and whispered, "Read this when you are alone." She would reveal years later that the letter contained a single verse from the Persian mystic Rumi. Goodbyes are only for those who love with their eyes." Then he bowed, kissed her forehead, and walked away with shoulders slumped like a man twice his age. As Soraya's convoy left Niavaran's gates, thousands of Tehranis lined the streets in stunned silence. Some threw roses, others simply pressed their palms together in prayer. A witness recalled that Soraya, seated behind tinted glass, pressed her hand to the window, a gesture both royal and heartbreakingly human. She flew first to Rome, then to Paris, where a penthouse overlooking the Bois de Boulogne waited, part of her divorce settlement, along with a monthly allowance and the lifelong title, Her Imperial Highness. Reporters mobbed the Hotel Raphael lobby, shouting questions. Would she remarry? Would she write a memoir? Soraya walked past them, head held high. Yet, when she reached her suite, she crumpled beside the balcony doors. She would later confess to a confidant that in that moment, she felt like a ghost whose heart still beat. The last time we saw Soraya, she was collapsing behind the balcony doors of her Paris penthouse, silver blue dusk washing across the Bois de Boulogne, while camera flashes burst in the street below. That moment, half queen, half exile, closed Part 1. Tonight we pick up the story only minutes later, with the hotel maid Tip towing in to clear untouched room service trays. The princess had thrown every silk cushion on the parquet floor and was pacing in stockinged feet, muttering in 4 languages, warning herself that life had a perverse talent for handing out second acts the very instant a person believed the curtain had fallen for good. She was, after all, only 26 years old. Paris smelled of fresh asphalt and espresso, and the decade about to begin would reward recklessness more than obedience. So Soraya leaned out the open window, let the city's Saturday frenzy fill her lungs, and decided that if she could not be queen, she would become something almost as improbable: free. Freedom, however, had its own etiquette in 1959. First, she had to master loneliness. She rented a discreet apartment on Avenue Montaigne, a space with enough mirrors to remind her she was still beautiful, but not enough memory to remind her she had once worn a diamond-encrusted sun throne on her head. Simone de Beauvoir's latest essays lay beside Persian translations of Rumi. Piaf rasped on the radio, while Soraya scribbled diary entries no court censor would ever see. She kept a timetable. Mornings with a French tutor to knock the formal palace cadence out of her accent. Afternoons strolling the left bank where no one bowed. Evenings hiding in the dark of Cinema Macmahon, learning how real actresses moved their arms. By Christmas, she was on first-name terms with editors at Paris Match, who noticed that the so-called sad-eyed empress photographed even better in street clothes than she ever had in coronation robes. January 1961 delivered her first public scandal outside Iran. At a gallery opening in Saint-Germain, a tall blonde man with a Bavarian drawl cited Nietzsche one moment and offered to teach her how to drive a Ferrari the next. Fritz Gunter Sachs, industrial heir, amateur photographer, professional trouble magnet, was exactly what Soraya's mother feared, and exactly what the tabloids craved. Within weeks, the pair were tearing up alpine passes in Sachs's sky-blue 250 GT, parking at dawn beside Lake Starnberg to drink champagne straight from the bottle. Sachs shot rolls of black and white film. Soraya laughing in wind-whipped hair. Soraya riding a Vespa in capri pants. Soraya dancing barefoot on the deck of a borrowed Riva. The pictures were never meant for publication, but the photographer's darkroom assistant leaked a few frames, and suddenly every cafe from Cologne to Kansas City displayed them, Royal Exile, and German Playboy, etched in silver grain like a Bertolucci dream. Iran's royalist press called the images sacrilege, European weeklies called them the beginning of swinging 60s chic. Soraya, for once, called them fun. Still, Sax's appetite for adrenaline outpaced even her need for distraction. When he switched his affections to Brigitte Bardot in 1966, showering Bardot's villa with helicopter-dropped roses, Soraya responded with the single telegram: "May the wind be at your back, and may it never blow a camera your way again." The line was equal parts Persian blessing and lethal Parisian snark. Friends pasted it to refrigerator doors as evidence that heartbreak could be stylish. The break from Sax left Soraya at a crossroads. She could retreat into heiress obscurity, or she could test whether the camera adored her for reasons deeper than scandal. Producer Dino De Laurentiis believed it did. He had watched the leaked photographs, noted the natural poise of her chin, and offered a screen test in Rome. Soraya arrived at Cinecittà in April 1963, wearing a simple white shirt and no jewelry. Michelangelo Antonioni, Mauro Bolognini, and Franco Indovina, the triumvirate directing a new anthology film, took turns peppering her with improv exercises. Antonioni asked her to repeat the word silence until it lost meaning. Bolognini made her walk across a studio with a book balanced on her head. Indovina merely stared, as if he already knew the shape of every emotion hidden behind those famous mournful eyes. The result was I tre volti, The Three Faces of a Woman, released in 1965. In Antonioni's quasi-documentary prologue, she played herself, auditioning for a fictional role. In Bolognini's segment, she morphed into Linda, a socialite flirting with danger. In Indovina's Latin Lover, she became Mrs. Melville, icy and vulnerable by turns. Critics were split. Some called her delivery wooden, others hypnotic, but all conceded that her face could anchor a 2-hour running time as easily as it once anchored a monarchy. Indovina, 10 years her senior and burning with Sicilian intensity, offered more than direction. Their working lunches blurred into midnight Vespa rides along the Tiber. His modest Trastevere flat sprouted Bakhtiary carpets and German art books, where the Shah had given her palaces and Sax had given her speedboats. Indovina gave her quiet. They cooked, argued about Fellini, and read scripts on threadbare couches while pigeons cooed outside. He even coaxed her into a Roman dialect so convincing that waiters at Da Gighetto assumed she was a senator's daughter. Paparazzi caught them kissing on Via Margutta, and for one glorious summer the headline, "Soraya Finds True Love," edged out Beatles news on Italian front pages. They talked marriage with the frankness of adults who had already lost too much to pretense, neither cared about titles or heirs. But fate, which had rehearsed tragedy in Soraya's life for 20 years, cleared its throat again on May 5, 1972. Indovina boarded Alitalia Flight 112 from Rome to Palermo to scout locations for their next film. The DC clipped Mount Longa during its night approach and exploded. All 115 people aboard perished. Soraya learned the news from a frantic call by cinematographer Carlo Di Palma. "The mountain, the flames. Franco is gone." She collapsed, struck her head on a marble table, and later confessed she couldn't feel the bruise because the pain in her chest obliterated every other sensation. For months she drifted between Rome and Paris, phoning Indovina's number just to hear the disconnected tone. She quit acting, sacked her Italian agent, and spoke publicly only once, at the Venice Film Festival, where she accepted a posthumous award for Franco with trembling hands, whispering, "He believed ordinary love could be epic. Now it is." Depression followed like a dense fog. Friends urged therapy. She chose solitude. She bought a small farmhouse near Cour Cheverny, raising Afghan hounds and donating anonymously to veterinary clinics because, she said, animals ask for nothing except presents, and presents I can still give. Eventually, presents demanded that she widen her focus. She endowed scholarships for mixed-heritage Iranian girls cut off from their families after the revolution. She funded quiet restoration of medieval stained glass in Chartres. She wrote letters, hundreds of them, advocating for civilian hostages in Lebanon. None bore her title. All were signed simply S.E., initials that could be decoded only by recipients who remembered what real queens once looked like. History, meanwhile, was trashing the world she had left behind. In 1979, Tehran erupted. In 1909, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi lay dying of lymphoma in a Cairo military hospital. A mutual friend, French writer Florence Gould, called Soraya one spring evening to say the Shah wanted to see her. "He still dreams in turquoise," Gould whispered. Soraya wrote back that she still loved him and would come immediately, but Farah, the Shah's third wife, never left his bedside, and protocol grew thornier than emotion. The Egyptian Air Force finally agreed to fly Soraya from Paris on the 2nd of July 1900. By the time her plane reached Alexandria airspace, Cairo radio was reporting the Shah's death. The pilot turned back without landing. Soraya shut her eyes and pictured their wedding day snowfall. Then, by force of will, pictured a Persian rose opening at dawn. She refused to let the story end in bitterness. When reporters blocked her Boulevard Raspail entrance, asking whether the Shah had wronged her, she said only, "He was once my entire horizon. Horizons shift. The sun remains the same." The 1900s funneled her into invisibility. She lost her father in 1933, her mother in 1994, and with every funeral her circle tightened. Yet, the decade also gave her a late ability to narrate her own myth. Publishers had begged since the divorce. She finally agreed, but on her terms. Le Palais des Solitudes, released in 1991, was neither a standard royal tell-all nor a sanitized press release. It read like a tapestry. One chapter lingered on Isfahan jasmine blooming at dusk. The next dissected palace intrigues with stiletto precision. Another recorded the precise audiogram of Indovina's laugh. Critics praised its melancholic poetry. Iranian exiles debated its political discretion. Psychologists called it a rare case of personal grief, doubling as cultural memoir. Sales soared, and royalties quietly funded literacy classes for Afghan refugee girls in Peshawar. Soraya declined television interviews. "I have said everything," she told a German journalist. "When a bird finally sings, you don't then ask it to do jumping tricks." Still, controversy stalked the silence. A French gossip weekly claimed she had given birth to a secret daughter in 1962, hidden from both Shah and society. A London tabloid alleged Swiss bankers were laundering money from her divorce settlement to fund monarchist militias. Soraya ignored most rumors, though she did instruct lawyers to threaten suit when a conspiracy blog insisted she orchestrated Indovina's flight to collect insurance. Her private letters reveal flashes of humor about the absurd. "If I truly had a hidden child," she wrote a cousin, "she would be 29 by now, and doubtless insisting I trade silk scarves for leather jackets." In truth, the deepest dispute came not from strangers, but from within her own family. Her younger brother, Bijan, was charming yet chronically unlucky in business, an art dealer one year, a would-be restaurateur the next. He relied on Soraya's allowance, but bristled at dependence. Their correspondence seesawed between affection and resentment, and when Bijan hinted he might auction objects from their mother's estate, Soraya exploded. We are not merchants of memory. They reconciled, but the fracture never fully healed. By autumn 2001, Soraya was 69 and felt older. High blood pressure shadowed her mother's side of the family. An ophthalmologist warned macular degeneration threatened those storied eyes. Yet she still attended matinee concerts at Salle Pleyel and kept a standing reservation at Café Flore every Thursday, table 12 near the window. On 24th October, she walked home from the cafe through a chilly drizzle, pausing to buy white freesias, Indovina's favorite, at the corner kiosk. The next morning, her maid found her lying beside the bouquet, face serene, as if sleep had remembered to be kind. Doctors cited a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Bijan, upon hearing the news, flew from Munich to Paris, wandered her apartment touching film stills and crest feathers from Bakhtiary jewelry, then returned to his hotel and suffered a fatal stroke of his own 6 days later. The siblings who had drifted apart in life chose to keep no distance in death. Funeral bells tolled at the American Cathedral of Paris on November 6, 2001. Mourners included Pahlavi relatives, European nobility, aging film technicians, and a handful of Iranian women who had attended those 1950s literacy classes the Queen once sponsored. They remembered her not for crowns, but for the way she folded a child's first paper airplane, buried in Munich's Westfriedhof beside her parents, and, soon after, her brother. She left behind an estate of art, jewelry, and real estate holdings estimated at £50 million. Competing wills, fraudulent heirs, and crusading lawyers tangled the settlement until 2003, when a German court, finding no blood relatives alive, awarded the bulk to public charities and cultural foundations. In death, as in life, Soraya's wealth dissolved into a wider world rather than powering another dynasty. 2 posthumous controversies refused to settle. One camp insists both Soraya and Bijan were murdered for their fortune, pointing to ambiguous autopsy timings. Forensic experts counter there is zero toxicological proof. Another faction believes her last unfinished screenplay, rumored to chronicle Iranian women's resistance to clerical rule, was stolen from her desk the night she died. The pages have never surfaced. Whether either claim is true, each underscores how fiercely strangers still guard the princess's narrative, unwilling to let finality close the tale. And so we ask, why does Soraya remain magnetic long after her world? The Pahlavi palaces, the jet-set Riviera, the golden age of Cinecittà, has receded into postcards? Partly it is the archetype. A Cinderella who wins the throne yet loses the fairy godmother's promise at midnight. Partly it is the mirror she holds up to the 20th century's contradictions. East and West, tradition and modernity, patriarchy and emergent female autonomy. Mostly, though, it is because her sorrow feels recognizable. Who hasn't stared at a closed door and wondered whether love can outlive circumstance? Who hasn't mourned futures that failed to arrive? Soraya's brilliance was that she allowed the world to watch her wrestle those universal questions in real time, on palace balconies, on Roman film sets, on Parisian pavements, and she did it with a dignity that forbade pity, even while it welcomed empathy. So ends our story. May it remind us that titles vanish, empires collapse, and camera flashes fade, yet the human capacity to turn loss into compassion is indestructible. Next time you cross the Pont de la Concorde at twilight, look for a tall, elegant ghost just beyond the lamplight. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time!